Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's digital workshop on quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing, all about how to properly use the evidence you want to include in your paper. When including evidence in your paper, you have three main options to consider: summarize, quote, or paraphrase. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between each method and when you might want to consider using each. This presentation is going to cover the key differences between quoting, summarizing, and paraphrasing, how to properly use each method, avoiding plagiarism when using these methods, and when to pick one method over the other. Quoting comes first because it's the easiest to distinguish from the rest. It is used when you want to use the exact words an author uses in a text. It is best used when the author uses a very specific or powerful language where altering their words would lose some of the meaning. Most people are more familiar with quoting since it is used very frequently when teaching how to write. Typically, it looks like this. Fitzgerald describes the Valley of Ashes as a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens. You could see here that the way you can distinguish this quote is from the quotation marks. And at the end, there is a page number. This is what it would look like in your text so that you can avoid plagiarism. The next example we'll talk about is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is when a writer takes an author's words and rephrases them. The writing will maintain the same original idea as the author they are referencing, but they use their own words instead of the author's. It is used when an idea the author has is important, but the specific words the author uses don't really matter too much. To avoid plagiarism with this method, you must still cite the page number and the source, just like a quote. You also need to make sure you are not using the same key vocabulary words as the author. We're going to look at an example of paraphrasing in a little bit. Before we do, let's talk about summarizing. Summarizing is when you take what the original author said and condense it into less of your own words. This is best used when covering larger pieces of text to say it in fewer words so that you have more space in your paper for your own thoughts and ideas. Similarly to with paraphrasing, to avoid plagiarism, you still need to cite where you're getting this information from. You also need to make sure that you are not using the same key vocabulary words as the author. But what if you want to use a few of those key vocabulary words? Like you want to paraphrase or summarize most of the text, but there are a couple words that the author uses that you can't think of a better way to say it. This is where you could think about combining methods. Sometimes a piece of evidence is better off being paraphrased or summarized, but there are a few key words that you do not wish to change. You can quote just a few words within your summarized or paraphrased text for emphasis. We'll show an example of that in a little bit as well. So let's take a look at some examples. The following is an excerpt from The Great Gatsby. I want you to pause, take a moment, and read over this example. Because this is what we're going to be looking at when it comes to our paraphrasing and summarizing. Have you taken a moment to pause? All right, let's move on. Think about for a moment which is which. Which is the paraphrase and which is the summary? On one side, we have the first. Fitzgerald vividly describes the Valley of Ashes. It's a wasteland filled with towering plumes of smoke and ash. Hopeless men wander through the space, looking as gray as the ash they toil in, and the loudest sound is that of subway cars screeching by. Our second example is this. In The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald describes the Valley of Ashes as a gray, desolate wasteland filled with dust and debris. Which do you think is which? Which is the paraphrase and which is the summary? The longer one here is the paraphrase. Typically with paraphrasing, you're not really changing the length of what you're talking about. If the author is going into detail, you can go into details too. You just want to change the key words that the author is using. In our summary here, we use very quick sentences, or only one sentence here really, to describe what was originally a very long paragraph. From this, you still get the same idea. Fitzgerald essentially is just describing a desolate wasteland filled with dust and debris. But with this, you don't get a lot of the same feeling that you get with the longer paraphrase. I am not showing a quote here because I showed a quote from the same section earlier. Let's now look at an example of combining methods. Fitzgerald describes the Valley of Ashes as a desolate place where ashes seem to grow in, quote, grotesque gardens, end quote. The smoke towers high, coating buildings and, quote, ash gray men, end quote, as far as the eye can see. In this example, I'm paraphrasing some of what was said, summarizing it, saying it shorter, but I still want to include a couple of those really vivid words that Fitzgerald uses to help paint a better picture for my reader. I couldn't use grotesque gardens in my original paraphrase or summary because that is way too specific. Fitzgerald uses that exact same language. But by combining methods here, I'm able to use that really vivid detail without having to quote the entire text. Why don't you give it a try? Below is an excerpt from The Great Gatsby. Using what you learned, quote, summarize, and paraphrase from the text below. You can try combining methods too. Take a moment now, pause your screen, read over what we have, and think to yourself, how would you practice using these methods? And that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions about summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting, you can come visit us in the library in room 1L08. You can also come visit us for any other writing issues that you might be having. Again, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful rest of your day.